Welcome to Sherlock Holmes, the case of the dying light. On a foggy New Year's Eve, London's lamps flicker out, and a man lies dead at the gasworks. What begins as darkness soon unravels into a deadly conspiracy only Holmes can solve. Where are you listening from? Let us know in the comments. Welcome to the mystery. It was on the last evening of December, in the year 1898, that the strange affair of the dying light first intruded upon our quiet domesticity in Baker Street. A soft frost lay over London, muting the usual clatter of carriages, and the gas lamps burned dimly through a mist that seemed reluctant to lift even for the New Year's Eve revelries. Holmes had taken up his violin, playing a slow, reflective air that echoed eerily in the firelit room. His long, thin fingers moved with an almost spectral grace, while I sat with a cup of steaming tea, gazing into the flames and thinking of how swiftly another year had passed. "Strange, is it not, Watson?" he said suddenly, setting his bow aside. "How men celebrate the turning of a calendar while remaining prisoners of their own folly. The same errors, the same ambitions, the same crimes merely dressed in new resolutions." I smiled. "You are in a philosophical mood tonight, Holmes. Perhaps that is your way of welcoming the new year." He made no reply, only stared at the dying embers as though tracing some invisible pattern in the ashes. Then, quite without warning, there came a violent knocking at the door. Mrs. Hudson, startled from her rest below, appeared moments later with a distressed gentleman in tow. The visitor was pale and trembling, his overcoat powdered with frost, and his expression that of one haunted by some ghastly vision. "You must help me, Mr. Holmes," he gasped. "For the love of mercy, I beg of you, come at once. There has been a terrible death at the lampright's yard." Holmes rose instantly, his whole demeanor sharpening from languor to intense alertness. "Compose yourself, sir," he said in his crispest tone. "You have come to the right place. Pray, state your name and the nature of this emergency." "My name is Ernest Mallory," the man stammered. "I am foreman of the gasworks near Clerkenwell. One of our night engineers, young fellow by the name of Charles Hanley, was found dead beside the main valve station not half an hour ago. The light, central gas flame that feeds half of London's northern quarter, it went out just before midnight. When we found him, his lamp was shattered, and he swallowed hard. There were marks on his throat, as if he had been strangled." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "And you say the central gas light failed at the same instant?" "Yes, sir. The whole quarter went dark for nearly 5 minutes. We thought it a technical fault, but when the reserve line was checked, we found Hanley lying there, the main lever half-turned. It makes no sense. He was alone, and there were no signs of struggle except the marks." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, it appears London has chosen a grim hour to usher in its new year. Fetch your coat. We shall accompany Mr. Mallory immediately." Within 15 minutes, we were rattling through the fog-cloaked streets in a cab, the faint sound of distant bells mingling with the hum of revelers. The gaslights flickered weakly, their glow no match for the thick air that pressed upon the city like damp wool. Holmes remained silent throughout the journey, his chin sunk into his scarf, eyes half-closed in thought. Only once did he speak, and that was to murmur, "The extinguishing of light, Watson, is often symbolic. Let us hope it is not prophetic." When we reached Lampright's yard, the scene was bleak and mechanical, a long expanse of iron piping, towers, and low buildings half shrouded in steam. The smell of gas was faint but distinct. A constable saluted us nervously, while a small group of workmen huddled near a shed where the body had been laid. The dead man, Hanley, was of medium build, no more than 25. His expression bore no terror, merely a frozen confusion. The skin around his throat was darkened in 2 symmetrical lines, too neat for fingers, too wide for wire. Holmes crouched beside the corpse, his magnifying lens glinting in the lantern light. He examined the bruises minutely, then turned his attention to the floor. The fragments of a broken lantern, a half-burned paper scrap, and a curious residue of soot near the lever. He said quietly, "Note the burn pattern here. This soot was not produced by gas combustion. It is from an oil flame, perhaps from a hand lamp. Yet Hanley's lantern was of the electric type." "Then someone else was here," I suggested. Holmes made no reply, but his gaze lingered upon a small metallic object caught in a groove between the iron plates. With his tweezers, he lifted it delicately into view, a brass button, engraved with the emblem of a bird clutching a torch. "Curious," he murmured. "This is not from a workman's uniform. Mallory, have you ever seen such an insignia among your staff?" Mallory shook his head. "No, sir. Our men wear plain blue coats. Nothing of that sort." Holmes pocketed the button, rose, and began to pace the perimeter of the valve chamber, every movement precise and silent. At last, he stopped before a darkened corner where a ladder ascended to the roof. "Watson, observe these impressions in the dust. Someone descended recently, someone wearing heavy boots, perhaps military in design. See the distinct pattern? Yet only one set of tracks leads downward. You mean they never went up again?" Holmes's lips curved faintly. "Precisely. Which means our intruder, left by another route, likely the service hatch above the main conduit. A dangerous exit, unless one knows the mechanism well." He turned abruptly to Mallory. "Mr. Mallory, you said the light failed just before midnight. Tell me who else, besides Hanley, had access to this chamber." "Only myself and Mr. Pritchard, the supervisor on duty. But Pritchard's been unwell these last few days, went home early this evening." "Indeed," said Holmes softly, as though filing the name away in some mental ledger. "Then it seems we must pay Mr. Pritchard a visit. For the moment, I advise you to keep this area sealed. No man enters without my permission." As we stepped back into the frozen air, the first church bells of the new year began to toll faintly through the fog. Holmes paused, looking toward the dim horizon where the lights of London flickered back to life. "A death by darkness, Watson," he said quietly. "Let us see whether this extinguished flame hides the shadow of murder or something far more deliberate." We returned to Baker Street just as dawn began to stain the mist above the city with a dull amber hue. Holmes had spoken scarcely a word during the cab ride, his lean figure bent forward, fingertips pressed together in the attitude I knew so well. I refrained from interrupting, for his silence was never mere brooding, it was the quiet hum of deduction, the gathering of threads that would soon weave into revelation. Once inside, he flung off his coat, took up a fresh sheet of paper, and began to sketch the scene of the gasworks with quick, decisive strokes. "Note, Watson," he said at last, "the lever's partial turn, not fully opened, not fully closed precisely midway. That is no accident. The killer wished to disrupt the gas flow but not to halt it entirely. Why? Because total darkness would have exposed the act as sabotage, whereas a mere dimming could pass as a technical fault." I leaned forward. "Then you believe it was murder, not a tragic mishap?" "My dear fellow," Holmes replied with a faint smile, "a man may die by accident, but strangulation seldom assists the process." He tapped his pencil against the paper. "The marks on Hanley's throat, too perfect, arcs, each with equal spacing. No man's fingers could have left them. They are the imprint of a cord pulled taut, with mechanical precision, possibly wire, possibly leather. Yet the symmetry speaks of a tool, not a struggle." He rose abruptly and paced to the window, his reflection a pale ghost in the morning fog. "The question, then, is not how Hanley died, but why the light itself was targeted. The lamp that failed powered an entire district. A 5-minute interruption at that hour would do little harm unless those 5 minutes concealed another event elsewhere in London." "You suspect a diversion?" "Perhaps," he said softly. "A master crime disguised by a momentary darkness. We must learn what transpired in that shadowed interval." Before I could reply, Mrs. Hudson entered with the morning post. Holmes seized a telegram among the envelopes, tore it open, and scanned its contents. His brows lifted slightly. Ah, Lestrade, ever punctual in pursuit of the impossible. He reports that a burglary took place in Finsbury Square shortly after midnight, the same time the gaslight failed. A safe forced open, documents stolen. The thief unseen. Coincidence, Watson? I think not. The gleam of excitement in his eyes was unmistakable. He caught up his hat and walking stick with the brisk energy of a hound catching scent. Come, Watson. The game advances. Before we visit Mr. Pritchard, we shall pay a brief call to Finsbury Square. A dimming light, a dead engineer, and a missing set of papers. Surely these are chapters of the same tale. The streets were still damp with fog as we arrived at the house of Sir Giles Harrington, the victim of the burglary. A portly gentleman in a velvet robe received us in his study, his manner torn between indignation and fatigue. I tell you, Mr. Holmes, he blustered, it was the devil's own timing. The lights went out, and when they returned, the safe was open. My securities are gone, along with a sealed envelope marked for the Foreign Office. Confidential, I assure you. Indeed, said Holmes, examining the damaged safe door. No sign of forced entry to the house itself? None. The servants were all awake, celebrating, I'm ashamed to admit, and none saw or heard a thing. Holmes knelt, running a long finger along the lock's edge. A practiced hand, the same faint residue of oil I observed on Hanley's soot, identical, I would wager. Our culprit worked with deliberate synchronization. The gaslight dimmed at precisely the moment he required darkness to mask his entry. He straightened, eyes narrowing. Sir Giles, who besides yourself knew of this document's existence? Only the courier who delivered it. And one other, my secretary. A young man named Arthur Pritchard. I started. Pritchard, the same name Mallory gave us, the supervisor at the gasworks. Holmes's smile was thin and dangerous. Yes, Watson. 2 men, 2 posts, and 1 uncommon name. It seems our Mr. Pritchard wears more than one uniform. We must discover which he truly belongs to, and before the trail grows cold. As we stepped once more into the pale London light, Holmes adjusted his scarf and glanced skyward, where the last traces of fog curled like smoke. A dying flame, a vanished paper, and a man who stands in 2 worlds, he murmured. The pattern brightens, Watson, though its center remains dark. Let us seek out Mr. Pritchard, and perhaps in his shadow we shall find the spark that killed Hanley and nearly extinguished more than a single light in London. Our next destination was a modest lodging house on Greville Street, where Mr. Arthur Pritchard was said to reside. The fog had thickened again, turning the lamplight into hazy orbs that floated like ghosts above the pavements. As our cab rattled along, Holmes remained lost in silent calculation, his long fingers drumming against his knee in that restless rhythm I had learned to interpret as the prelude to deduction. When at last he spoke, it was in a tone of quiet conviction. Watson, the odds against coincidence grow longer by the minute. 2 Pritchards linked by time, circumstance, and consequence, impossible without design. The question is not whether they are connected, but how deeply. The cab halted before a tall, narrow house with soot-stained bricks and a faint light burning behind one of its upper windows. Holmes motioned for me to follow as he ascended the steps and knocked firmly. It was answered by a landlady in a shawl, who eyed us with the suspicion common to London lodging-keepers. "Mr. Pritchard?" Holmes inquired briskly. "Second floor, sir. But he's not in, went out early. Before dawn." He did. Looked pale as death, poor gentleman, and carried a small case with him. "Did he leave any message?" She shook her head. "Only said he'd be gone for a day or 2. Paid his rent up till Monday." Holmes thanked her and slipped a coin into her hand before mounting the stairs 2 at a time. The door to Pritchard's room was locked, but Holmes had it open in less than a minute, using a small tool he drew from his pocket. Inside, the air was close, heavy with the faint odor of machine oil and stale tobacco. The room was plainly furnished. A narrow bed, a writing desk, and a single chair. Papers lay scattered across the desk, along with a drawing of what appeared to be an industrial valve system. Holmes bent over it, his eyes glinting. "Observe, Watson. This is the same model as the main gas regulator at Lampright's yard. And here, look, someone has annotated it with notes about pressure tolerances and emergency release levers." Pritchard knew the system intimately. He opened the drawer and extracted a small notebook bound in brown leather. Flipping through the pages, he stopped at one heavily smudged entry dated 2 nights earlier. "Midnight trial H to signal by light. Failure. 5 minutes sufficient. Envelope to be collected at Harrington's." He closed it with a snap. So there we have it. Hanley H. was an accomplice, not a victim at the outset. The light failure was planned. But something went wrong. Either greed intervened, or Hanley saw too much. "Then Pritchard killed him to silence him," I suggested. "Perhaps. Yet I do not sense a common criminal here, Watson. These notes are too careful, too deliberate. This was organized by a mind familiar with both machinery and method. There is purpose beyond theft." He paused, then examined a faint soot stain on the window ledge. He signaled someone outside. The pattern of smudges, 3 short, 2 long, almost like a telegraph code. Someone waited below to receive his message. I stepped to the window, but who could see it through that fog? Someone stationed close. A watcher, not a stranger, likely in league with him. Holmes' eyes darted toward the floor, where a corner of paper jutted from beneath the bed. He stooped, drew it out, and unfolded it carefully. It was a railway timetable for the Dover line, the 10:15 departure marked with a firm stroke of pencil. "Interesting," he murmured. "Our Mr. Pritchard intends to vanish across the channel. It seems he fancies himself beyond the reach of the law come the new year." Holmes rose swiftly. "We must move at once. The Dover train leaves in less than an hour, and I do not believe fortune favors the idle. Watson, your revolver, bring it. We may yet find ourselves facing a desperate man." The cabman scarcely had time to curse before Holmes sprang inside and shouted, "Victoria Station, quickly! And there's another half-sovereign if you make it before the quarter strikes." The streets blurred past in streaks of grey and gold, the gaslights flickering like dying embers through the mist. We reached the terminus with minutes to spare. The vast iron roof loomed above the prisoned platform, echoing with the hiss of steam and the shuffle of travelers bound for France. Holmes scanned the crowd with hawk-like precision. His gaze stopped upon a tall man in a dark coat, carrying a small case the same description the landlady had given. "Pritchard," Holmes whispered. "He means to board alone." We advanced cautiously, but before Holmes could step forward, another figure detached itself from the crowd, a man in a long cloak, face obscured by the brim of his hat. He placed a gloved hand on Pritchard's shoulder, spoke a few low words, and together they turned toward the far carriage. Holmes's voice was a tense whisper. "So, there is a second conspirator, after all. Stay close, Watson. Whatever play they are making, the next move will reveal the true hand behind this dying light." Holmes motioned for silence as we slipped among the shifting crowd, the hiss of the locomotive masking our steps. The air was thick with steam and the faint scent of coal oil. Announcements echoed through the vaulted station, distorted by the iron roof above. Pritchard and his mysterious companion moved swiftly toward the end carriage, their manner hurried but cautious. Holmes's hand brushed my sleeve. "Do not look at them directly, Watson. Observe the rhythm of their movement. See how the taller man guides him, as if ensuring obedience. Pritchard is not the leader here. He is being handled." We followed at a discreet distance until the 2 men boarded the rear compartment. Holmes's gaze darted along the platform until he spotted a luggage porter. "A moment, my good fellow," he said, pressing a half-crown into the man's hand. "This carriage, where is it bound?" "Dover, sir. Straight through special late addition to the line. Unusual for the hour." Holmes nodded grimly. "Then we must accompany them." Without hesitation, He pulled open the next carriage door, and we slipped inside just as the whistle blew. The train lurched forward, gathering speed as London's grey streets fell away into the dim countryside. Holmes leaned close, speaking under his breath. "Keep your revolver ready, Watson. We are riding with shadows now. Observe." Our suspects occupy the next compartment, divided only by this thin panel. We shall listen first, then act. For several minutes we heard only the rumble of wheels and the rhythmic clatter of steel on steel. Then came voices muffled, cautious, but distinct enough through the wooden partition. "I told you," said Pritchard, his voice trembling. "It wasn't meant to end that way." Hanley panicked when the flame died too soon. He tried to reverse the lever. "I only meant to stop him." "Your sentimentality has cost us dearly," replied the deeper voice, calm but laced with menace. "The envelope is gone. Without it, the entire plan collapses. I swear I left it in Harrington's safe." A sharp crack of knuckles on wood interrupted him. "Do not insult me. The envelope was collected, as arranged, yet you delayed our signal. That delay drew attention, and now Holmes is in play." I started involuntarily, but Holmes raised a hand to silence me, his eyes glittering. "So," he murmured, "they know we're involved. That confirms the scale of their operation, organized, deliberate, and aware of interference." The deep voice continued, quieter now. "We reached Dover. Take the packet from the agent at the pier and proceed to Calais. If we are pursued, there will be adjustments." "Adjustments?" Pritchard echoed faintly, a cold laugh. "Yes. You have proven unreliable, my friend. Pray you remain useful until morning." The tone of that phrase chilled me more than the winter air seeping through the window cracks. Holmes straightened suddenly, his decision made. "Watson, we cannot allow them to disembark together. If that man reaches the continent, we may lose more than this case, perhaps something far larger. There is statecraft here, not mere theft." "What shall we do?" I whispered. He glanced toward the connecting door. "We confront them before Dover. At the next stop, I will draw out the leader. You guard Pritchard. Be ready, our quarry is no common thief." Moments later, the train began to slow as it approached the small station of Chatham. Holmes rose swiftly, his every movement precise. "Now, Watson." He slid open the compartment door and stepped into the narrow passage. The adjoining door was half ajar. Pritchard sat rigid, his face drained of color, while the cloaked man turned sharply at our intrusion. Beneath the brim of his hat, a pair of piercing gray eyes met Holmes's. "Mr. Holmes," he said smoothly, without surprise. "I had wondered when you would appear." Holmes regarded him coolly. "You have the advantage of me, sir." The man smiled faintly. "An old habit. Let us call it Mr. Gray for convenience. I commend your punctuality. Few men would track a gas engineer through half of London for a matter they scarcely understand." "The death of Charles Hanley is no matter of misunderstanding," Holmes replied. "You planned that failure to conceal your theft, and you used this man as your instrument." Gray's eyes hardened. "Hanley was careless. His death was regrettable, but necessary. The world turns on necessity, Mr. Holmes, and sometimes the light must die so that larger fires may burn." Before Holmes could reply, the train jerked violently as it came to a halt. The station lamps flickered through the mist outside. In that instant, Gray struck swift as a viper, sending Holmes reeling against the wall. I lunged forward, revolver drawn, but Gray had already flung open the door and vanished into the swirling fog of the platform. "Watson!" Holmes snapped, regaining his balance. "After him, he must not reach the pier." But by the time we leapt down, the mist had swallowed him. Only the echo of our hurried footsteps faded into the night. Holmes stood motionless for a long moment, then turned toward me with that sharp gleam of controlled fury I had seen only when a case turned personal. He knew my name before I spoke. "That man, Watson, is no ordinary criminal. We are dealing with a mind trained in secrecy, in strategy, This is not the end of our pursuit, it is the beginning." And as the whistle shrieked once more, signaling the train's departure, I saw in Holmes's eyes that peculiar fire, the light that would not die until the truth itself was caught and laid bare before him. Holmes and I stood on the deserted platform as the train disappeared into the fog, its tail lamps glowing faintly like dying embers in the mist. The sound of its departure faded into a hollow silence, broken only by the hiss of cooling steam from the engine. A single lantern swung on a nearby post, casting wavering shadows across the wet stones. Holmes's gaze was fixed on the direction Gray had vanished, his expression one of fierce concentration rather than frustration. He did not curse the escape, for I knew such moments only sharpened his resolve. He was prepared for us, Holmes murmured at last. The blow, the retreat, the timing, everything rehearsed. Gray is not merely a thief, he is an operative. The envelope stolen from Sir Giles must hold information of grave importance, something worthy of orchestration on this scale. "Then what now?" I asked, glancing about the empty station. "He has the night, the fog, and perhaps accomplices waiting down the line." Holmes crouched near the platform edge, running his fingers lightly over the damp surface. "Accomplices, yes, but not omniscient ones. Observe, Watson. Here, the faint impression of a boot heel broad, foreign make, not the same as the English pattern Pritchard wore." He ran toward the freight sheds. Without further hesitation, we followed the faint trail, our breaths ghosting in the chill air. The sheds loomed dark ahead, their outlines blurred in the thickening fog. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled midnight anew, an echo from another town perhaps, carried over the stillness like a dirge. Holmes paused beside a locked side door, withdrew a slender blade from his coat, and deftly slipped the latch. We stepped inside, and the dense silence swallowed us whole. The interior smelled of iron, hemp, and salt, the tang of cargo bound for the docks. A few dim lamps burned low along the far wall, revealing stacked crates stenciled with foreign markings. Holmes moved like a phantom between them, every motion deliberate, his sharp eyes sweeping for the smallest trace. Suddenly, he halted, his hand raised. Footprints in the dust, 2 sets, one heavy, one light. They stopped here. He bent down and brushed aside a fragment of packing straw to reveal a small metallic glint. It was a pocket watch, its glass cracked, its back engraved with the initials A.P. "Pritchard," I whispered. "He must have dropped it in the struggle. Or it was placed here," Holmes replied softly. "Gray is too calculating to leave such a clue by accident. He wants us to think Pritchard is dead or close to it. The question is, why?" A faint rustling interrupted him. We froze. From beyond a stack of crates came a low moan, barely audible. Holmes motioned for silence and stepped forward, revolver drawn. When he rounded the corner, I heard him exhale sharply. "Watson, bring your lantern." There, half hidden beneath a tarp, lay Pritchard alive, but barely. His face was ashen, his breath shallow, a dark bruise circling his throat. Holmes knelt beside him and loosened his collar. The man's eyes fluttered open weakly, recognizing the figure above him. "Holmes! He's gone." Gray took it. The envelope said he'd finish it in Dover. "Finish what, Pritchard?" Holmes asked, his voice calm but insistent. "What's in that envelope?" Pritchard's lips trembled. "Blueprints, new gas distribution design, ministry contract, but it wasn't about the gas. It was about power. London's central line, Gray said the French were paying double." His words dissolved into a cough that racked his frail frame. "I never meant for Hanley to die. He tried to warn me." "Enough," Holmes said quietly, pressing his hand to the man's shoulder. "Save your strength. You'll live if we move quickly." But Pritchard shook his head weakly. "He'll kill anyone who stands in his way," he said. "Even the great Holmes can't see in the dark." His hand twitched once, then fell limp. I felt Holmes's fingers at the man's pulse, the faint rhythm fading beneath them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he rose abruptly, the pale gleam of determination replacing any trace of pity. "A confession sealed by death," he murmured, "and a thief who traffics not in money, but in national secrets. Come, Watson, the chase leads to Dover, and the tide waits for no man." We slipped from the shed into the open air once more. The fog had thinned slightly, revealing the glimmer of distant lanterns along the rail line. Holmes turned toward them, his long coat sweeping behind him like a shadow reborn. "Gray believes himself untouchable once he reaches the sea," he said quietly. "But he forgets one thing: light may die, Watson, yet the dawn always returns." And with that, we set off into the frozen night, the faint whistle of an early train echoing through the darkness, carrying us toward Dover and the heart of the conspiracy that had begun with the dying of a single London light. The first grey of dawn was beginning to creep across the horizon when our hired carriage drew up near Dover harbour. A biting wind whipped from the channel, carrying with it the tang of salt and the distant cry of gulls. Holmes stepped down before the wheels had stopped turning, his eyes scanning the fog-draped pier with the alertness of a hawk sighting prey. He moved swiftly, speaking low but firm. "Gray will attempt to leave on the morning steamer to Calais. The tide turns at 6. We have less than 20 minutes to intercept him before the ship sails." We crossed the cobbled quay, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and wet timber. The port was half awake, shrouded in mist. Dockhands shouted to one another through the gloom, while lanterns bobbed along the gangways like fireflies in a dream. Holmes paused beside a stack of crates, listening. "He will not travel openly," he muttered. "A man like Gray knows how to vanish in plain sight. Watch for any who seem to watch us." We approached the ticketing office, where a weary clerk rubbed his eyes beside a lantern. Holmes presented his card briskly. "Sherlock Holmes, consulting detective, has a passenger boarded for Calais under the name Gray, or perhaps under any alias purchased in haste." The man frowned and flipped through a ledger. "A Mr. Armitage took the first-class cabin, sir, paid in gold. Arrived before dawn with no luggage save a small leather case. He went aboard 10 minutes ago." Holmes's lips curved slightly. "Armitage, an old military pseudonym, if I am not mistaken." He turned to me. "That is our man. Come, Watson, the fog is our ally now." The deck of the steamer loomed ahead, a black silhouette against the dim light. We moved quietly up the gangplank, our boots slick with frost. The deckhands paid us little heed as we mingled among the few passengers, all muffled in coats and scarves. Holmes guided me with a subtle gesture toward the rear cabins, his gaze fixed on a figure standing near the rail, a tall man, face obscured by the collar of his coat, the faint glimmer of a brass watch chain at his vest. Holmes advanced until we were but 10 paces behind him. "Good morning, Mr. Gray," he said evenly. "Or should I say Colonel Armitage, formally, of the Foreign Service?" The man turned slowly, his expression unreadable, the faintest smile on his lips. "Holmes, you're persistent, I'll grant you that, but I fear you've arrived at the wrong voyage." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, his voice crisp as the wind. "You've boarded the wrong escape. You carry a ministry prototype, one capable of diverting the entire gas supply of London with a single lever adjustment. Its theft is no petty crime. Its sale abroad would cripple the city's lifeblood. You have 30 seconds to surrender it." Gray's gaze flicked to the sea, then back to Holmes. "You overestimate the decency of your employers, Holmes. That device was designed not to illuminate, but to silence, to shut down districts, to control dissent. Do you really think your beloved government wanted it for light?" Holmes's expression hardened, though his tone remained composed. "A convenient philosophy for a thief. The justifications of scoundrels are always dressed in righteousness. Hand it over." Gray's hand slipped toward his coat. Instantly, Holmes lunged, catching his wrist in a vice-like grip. The two men struggled near the rail, boots scraping against the icy planks. I rushed forward, but the ship gave a sudden lurch as it pulled from the dock. In that moment of imbalance, Gray twisted free and drew a revolver from beneath his coat. Enough, he snarled. Step back, both of you, or London will burn darker than you can imagine. He pulled a small brass cylinder from his pocket, the stolen prototype itself. Its valves gleamed faintly in the dawn light. Holmes raised a hand in calm defiance. You misunderstand, Colonel. That device is already harmless. I removed its detonating pin in Pritchard's room. Gray's eyes flickered with shock, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. Holmes sprang forward, knocking the revolver aside. The gun discharged, the shot whistling harmlessly into the sea. Gray staggered backward, clutching at the rail. The ship's horn bellowed as if in warning, and in the next instant he was gone, vanished into the fog and water below. Holmes leaned over the side, scanning the waves. Nothing. Only ripples spreading outward in the cold, pale light. He straightened slowly, his breath visible in the chill air. He was a dangerous man, Watson, but not without intellect. It is possible he planned for even this. I looked down at the dark water, shivering. Do you think he's dead? Holmes's eyes remained on the horizon. Men like Gray rarely die when they are convenient to justice. But whether he surfaces again or not, the secret he carried will trouble no one now. He turned toward the rising sun, its faint glow piercing the fog like a blade of gold. The dying light burns once more, my dear Watson. But I fear, before this year is out, that same light may yet dim for graver reasons than gas or greed. And as the ship's whistle echoed over the waking sea, I knew the chase had ended, but not the shadow it cast upon Sherlock Holmes's restless mind. For several minutes after Gray's fall, neither of us spoke. The sound of the sea striking against the hull filled the silence like an unending breath. Holmes remained by the rail, eyes fixed on the widening ripples where Gray had vanished. His posture was still, almost statuesque, yet I knew that beneath that composure, his mind was dissecting every detail of what had just occurred. The pale light of morning broke through the fog in thin streaks, glimmering faintly on the wet deck and on the brass cylinder that Holmes now held in his hand. He turned it slowly, examining the small device with the expression of a surgeon inspecting a foreign object cut from a patient's wound. "It is as I thought," he said at last. Pritchard's note spoke of a regulator capable of halting gas flow from a central valve across an entire district. But look here, Watson, this component is not simply mechanical. He pointed to a series of delicate wires coiled within the casing. It can be triggered remotely, through an electrical impulse. Imagine it one man, one switch, and London goes dark. Not a lamp burning from Westminster to Shoreditch. I felt a chill run through me. Then Gray meant to sell this? Holmes gave a brief, grim nod. To the highest bidder. Nations pay well for silence. Watson, sometimes more than they pay for light. I have no doubt he was acting under orders from abroad. His disappearance will not be the end of it. There are others who will come looking for this. He slipped the device into his coat pocket, turned, and strode toward the bridge. The captain, a grizzled man with weather-beaten features, met us with obvious alarm. "Sir, the man overboard, should we lower a boat?" Holmes shook his head. "You may try, though you'll find little but water and regret. The tide's already against you." He handed the captain his card. "When you dock, deliver a full report to Inspector Lestrade at Scotland Yard. Tell him the affair is concluded, but to keep watch for any further correspondence bearing the name Armitage or any dealings tied to the Lampright Gas Company." The captain blinked, nodded, and hurried off. Holmes and I withdrew to the aft cabin, where he sank into a seat with uncharacteristic weariness. The strain of the night, though invisible to most, showed in the faint tightening around his eyes. He drew out his pipe, lit it, and sat in silence as the smoke curled upward in thin, uncertain rings. "You seem troubled," I ventured. "You have the device. The culprits are dead or scattered. Surely that's victory enough?" "Victory?" he echoed softly. "Perhaps. But every solved mystery leaves a residue. Watson, a shadow that does not lift even when the truth is laid bare. There is something about Gray's last words that disturbs me. For illumination but control, If he spoke truth, then someone within the ministry may have sanctioned its design for precisely that purpose. I frowned. You think there's corruption at the root? I think, Holmes said, tapping the pipe against the table, that even the brightest lamps can cast dark motives behind them. Still, conjecture is not proof, and without Gray alive to name his masters, the matter must rest in ambiguity. He rose suddenly, as though shaking off the weight of thought, and looked out toward the fading coastline. London awaits us. There are reports to deliver, statements to file, and a certain Lestrade who will undoubtedly try to claim half the credit. But I confess, I shall not soon forget the sound of that man's words as he fell the confidence of one who believed himself part of something larger than mere crime. By the time we reached Charing Cross that afternoon, the fog had lifted entirely, revealing a crisp winter sky over the city. Holmes strode ahead of me through the throng, his long coat sweeping behind him like a banner. Strange, is it not, Watson, he remarked, that we began with a single extinguished lamp and end now with the realization that entire empires may flicker by the same fragile light. The machinery of civilization runs on invisible wires, cut them, and men stumble in darkness. At Baker Street, the fire was already lit, and Mrs. Hudson had left tea and a plate of buttered toast. Holmes placed the recovered device upon the mantelpiece, its dull brass gleam reflecting in the hearth glow. For a long moment he studied it without speaking. Then he said, almost to himself, "It is fitting that we call it the dying light, for though its flame is gone, the shadow it cast remains and will, I suspect, for some time to come." He turned toward me with a faint, almost wistful smile. "Come, Watson, let us have our tea. The world may darken and burn, but for now, I find that toast and quiet company remain the best safeguards against despair." And as the winter twilight gathered over Baker Street, I could not help but feel that though the case was closed, its echo would linger like a faint flicker at the edge of vision, reminding us that in London, no light ever dies without reason. The following days passed in uneasy quiet. London, oblivious to how close it had come to a manufactured darkness, went about its affairs with its usual indifference. Newspapers spoke of the mysterious death at Lampright's Yard, but dismissed it as an industrial accident. No mention was made of Colonel Armitage, nor of any stolen device, nor of the secret that had threatened to extinguish more than mere light. Yet in the stillness of Baker Street, I sensed that the case had not, in truth, concluded. Holmes had taken to pacing restlessly from window to hearth, his pipe clamped between his teeth, his gaze distant and abstracted. The little brass cylinder lay upon the mantelpiece still, its dull gleam catching the firelight like a sleeping serpent. On the third evening after our return, I found Holmes standing motionless before it, arms folded, his expression grave. "Watson," he said quietly, "do you recall the inscription on the interior valve of this instrument?" I hesitated. "A series of initials, was it not? C. M. followed by the year." "Precisely. Those initials have occupied me. You will remember that Colonel Armitage was an engineer before his military appointment, yet these letters are not his. I have consulted my records and discovered something remarkable. C. M. corresponds to one Charles Meriton, an inventor who vanished from London nearly 5 years ago after accusations of espionage against the Admiralty." I started. "You believe Meriton designed this regulator?" "Designed, yes, but not for the purpose to which it was turned. I have found notes in the Patent Office archives describing an experimental pressure stabilizer intended to protect the gas network from sudden rupture, not destroy it. His disappearance shortly afterward suggests his design was stolen, adapted, and repurposed. The man who did so must have possessed both technical understanding and access to government laboratories. Armitage or Gray, as he styled himself, could not have done that alone." "You mean someone within the ministry was involved?" Holmes turned, his eyes alight with that fierce intelligence that burned only when a fresh layer of mystery revealed itself. "Just so. Consider Pritchard's dying words. He'll kill anyone who stands in his way. Even the great Holmes can't see in the dark. That was not mere terror. It was warning. Grey was but a blade in another's hand. The true hand remains unseen. Before I could speak, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson appeared with a telegram upon a tray. Holmes seized it, tore it open, and read aloud. From Lestrade, Scotland Yard. Urgent. Explosion at Limehouse Dock. Fire spreading. Possible sabotage. Inquiry requested, your presence needed. Holmes's eyes met mine. And thus, the shadow moves again. Come, Watson, there is work to be done. We were soon rattling through the damp streets in a cab, the scent of smoke already thick in the wind. When we reached Limehouse, chaos reigned. A section of the dockside had been torn apart by a violent blast. Timbers smouldered, hoses hissed, and the river itself shimmered with a thin sheen of burning oil. Lestrade, his face streaked with soot, greeted us grimly. Good Lord, Holmes, it's the devil's own mess. One of the warehouses went up not an hour ago. Witnesses swear they saw a man flee the scene before it happened, tall, coat to his heels. Some say they heard him laughing. Holmes's brows knit. Laughing, describe him. Couldn't see much through the smoke. But one sailor swears he wore gloves, yellow ones, of all things. The fire brigade found this near the blast site. He handed Holmes a twisted scrap of metal, what remained of a smaller cylinder, identical in design to the one resting on our mantelpiece. Holmes examined it, and his voice, when he spoke, was almost a whisper. So the design persists. Grey may have fallen into the sea, but his shadow walks on. We made our way toward the ruined warehouse, the ground slick with water and ash. The acrid smoke clawed at the throat. Holmes crouched near a shattered pipe, brushing soot from a faint chalk mark upon the stone. It formed a rough letter M. He stared at it for a long moment before straightening. Watson, he said softly, we are not dealing with the dead hand of Grey, but the living work of Meryton himself. I stared at him. You think he's alive? Holmes's tone was distant, almost reverent. Alive, yes, and vengeful. Imagine a man betrayed by his government, his inventions stolen, his name blackened, his life ruined. He disappears, only to return when the machine he created for good becomes a weapon in another's scheme. The explosion tonight was not sabotage, it was retribution. Meryton is cleaning the trail of his own stolen genius. A sudden cry from one of the constables drew our attention. Over here, sir, something in the water. We hurried to the river's edge, where two men were dragging a body from the shallows. It was not Grey, nor any dockhand. The corpse was thin, grey-haired, dressed in a fine but outdated coat. Holmes knelt and turned the head gently toward the lantern light. The features were lined and weathered, but the eyes, half open and staring, held an unmistakable intelligence. Charles Meryton, Holmes murmured. And the circle closes. Lestrade gaped. You mean to say he's the one who caused this? Holmes shook his head. Not caused, completed. The final act of a man who would rather perish with his secret than let it serve the corruption that ruined of him. He glanced toward the burning ruins, where the last tongues of flame flickered against the black water. He has destroyed the formula, the prototypes, and himself. There will be no more dying lights, Watson, but in his way, he has left us a different kind of darkness, one of conscience. We watched as the constables carried the body away, the fog swallowing them until only the lantern glow remained. Holmes turned to me, his voice quieter now. Do you see, Watson, how even light mankind's proudest creation may fall victim to ambition? We chase knowledge, we build wonders, and yet, inevitably, we find new ways to turn illumination into shadow. As the flames dwindled and the wind shifted from smoke to sea air, Holmes's silhouette stood stark against the dim sky, his coat whipping around him like a banner in retreat. He drew a deep breath and spoke as if to the night itself. The case of the dying light is done, yet I wonder, was it victory, or merely the prevention of something worse? Perhaps, in saving London's brightness, we have only delayed the hour when its lights will fade again. We left the docks in silence, the echo of the river following us all the way back to Baker Street, and when we returned, Holmes did something I had never seen before. He opened the hearth, took the brass cylinder from the mantelpiece, and, without a word, cast it into the fire. The flames leapt high for a moment, flaring gold against his impassive face, then sank back into embers. "Let it end here," he said quietly. "For there are some inventions, Watson, that mankind is not yet fit to possess." And as I watched the last spark die away, I felt that Holmes was not speaking of machines alone, but of something far more fragile. The perilous light within men's hearts that, once dimmed, might never burn as purely again. The fire had burned low, casting long, restless shadows across the sitting room, when Holmes finally spoke again. For hours, after our return from Limehouse, he had remained in his chair before the hearth, silent, motionless, the faint glow of the embers reflected in his eyes. Outside, the wind moaned down Baker Street, carrying with it the chill scent of smoke and the distant rumble of carriages. The city, unaware of how close it had come to calamity, slept in fragile peace. Holmes drew thoughtfully upon his pipe, the smoke curling upward like the ghosts of thoughts too elusive to voice. "Watson," he said at last, "we have reached the conclusion of a case, yet not the end of its consequences. Meryton is dead. Yes, but death, as you well know, does not always bury the truth. There remains something that refuses to settle." I glanced toward the mantel, where only the faint scorch mark of the melted brass cylinder testified to what he had destroyed. "You mean the affair may not be as closed as we thought?" Holmes's gaze shifted toward the window, where the faintest hint of dawn trembled beyond the glass. "Consider it, my dear fellow. Meryton's death was too timely, too neat. He perished amidst his own flames, conveniently silencing any who might question his motives. Yet who lit the fire? He had the skill, yes, but perhaps not the will. A man who spent years hiding his genius would not choose to obliterate it so absolutely unless pressed. No, I believe someone assisted him, perhaps even ensured his demise." "You suspect murder?" Holmes exhaled slowly. "Not in the ordinary sense. A hand guided events. Watson, one, subtle, patient, and careful enough to shape this affair from beginning to end. Gray was but a pawn, Meryton the tragic craftsman, but the true player has not yet stepped into view. If my reasoning is correct, the theft of the regulator was only one move in a larger game, one that has not yet concluded." He rose and began pacing before the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back. Gray spoke of those who would pay double, but he never named them. A curious omission for a man so fond of boasting. Whoever financed his mission had influence enough to remain invisible and resources enough to obtain scientific blueprints from the ministry. That is no petty thief, Watson. That is a power. A knock at the door interrupted him. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a letter sealed in red wax. "Just arrived, sir," delivered by hand. Holmes took it, broke the seal, and unfolded the single sheet within. His eyes narrowed as he read aloud. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, your interference in the matter of the dying light was foreseen. The mechanism you destroyed was but one of several. Progress cannot be undone by fire. The next dawn will bring proof." A friend of illumination, Holmes's face grew taut, his sharp features set in lines of cold resolve. "Progress cannot be undone by fire," he repeated softly. "So the serpent yet lives." He held the paper to the flame and watched it curl to ash. "We are being challenged, Watson. Whoever sent this is not finished." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Do you think they mean to strike again?" "Unquestionably." The phrase, "next dawn," suggests a deliberate timetable. If the same principles that governed the regulator are being applied elsewhere, then another demonstration is imminent, perhaps one meant to remind London of its fragility. Before I could reply, Holmes seized his hat and coat. "We must go to Scotland Yard. Lestrade must be informed at once. There is a pattern here, a sequence of connected events that we must decipher before the clock runs out." Within the hour, we stood in Lestrade's office amid a clutter of reports and telegrams. The inspector looked up wearily as we entered. "Holmes, if this is about the Limehouse affair, I've already signed off the inquest. Accidental death case closed." "Then reopen it," Holmes snapped. "You have overlooked the most crucial fact. The explosion was not final, it was preparatory. I believe further devices of the same design have been distributed across London, each capable of disrupting the gas flow to entire districts. If they are triggered simultaneously, the result would be panic, fire, and collapse of infrastructure across the city." Lestrade blinked, clearly rattled. "Good Lord, man. You can't mean that there's no proof." Holmes fixed him with that piercing gaze that had unmanned far cleverer men. "Then find it. Issue an immediate inspection of every gas junction and pressure valve installed within the last 6 months. Look for any anomalies in design or material. I shall begin at the source, the Ministry of Power itself." We left before Lestrade could protest further. Outside, the streets were wet with mist, the lamps reflecting upon the cobbles like blurred stars. Holmes hailed a cab, his manner taut with controlled urgency. "The ministry offices at Westminster open at dawn. If the saboteurs have placed their devices, as I suspect, they would be in key locations: Parliament Street, the Financial Quarter, and the bridges. A blackout there would do more than inconvenience, it would paralyze the capital." We arrived at the ministry as the first light crept over the river. The guard at the gate recognized Holmes at once and admitted us. Inside, the corridors were silent save for the echo of our steps. Holmes moved swiftly to the engineering division, where a clerk, anxious and pale, rose from his desk. "Mr. Holmes, sir, thank heaven you've come. We received an anonymous warning not an hour ago. The message said the system must be shut down immediately or the city will suffer a second darkness." Holmes's eyes flashed. "Where is the control room?" "Downstairs, sir, 3rd corridor on the left." We descended into the lower levels, the air growing colder and heavier. The chamber at the end was filled with the rhythmic hum of machinery. Rows of brass pipes ran along the walls, their gauges trembling faintly. And there, half concealed behind a column, was a small, cylindrical object attached by wires to the main conduit. Holmes went down on one knee beside it, examining it with swift precision. "The same mechanism," he murmured, "more compact, more refined. This was no mere copy. Whoever built this understood Meriton's original design better than Meriton himself." I bent beside him. "Can it be disarmed?" "Yes, but we must be precise." His fingers moved delicately among the wires, his eyes following their coiling paths. The tension in the room was unbearable. Even the machinery seemed to hold its breath. At last, with a faint metallic click, Holmes withdrew a slender copper pin. The gauge needle dropped to 0. "It's done," he said quietly. "For now." I exhaled in relief, but Holmes was already rising, his gaze fixed on the narrow doorway beyond. "He's here, Watson. The man who set this is still within these walls. He left it active to draw me out." The letter was bait, and I, like a fool, took it. At that moment, a soft sound, a closing door, a footstep echoed faintly down the corridor. Holmes turned sharply toward it, his eyes burning with sudden realization. "Come quickly! The final piece of the game is about to move." And as we ran through the dim passageway, the light above flickered once, then again, as though London itself held its breath, waiting to see whether its great detective would save it from the darkness once more. The sound of our footsteps echoed sharply through the narrow corridor, the gaslight above flickering like a nervous pulse. Holmes moved ahead of me with the swiftness of a man chasing the very thought that had just formed in his mind. The faint tread of another pair of feet, measured, deliberate, sounded somewhere beyond the next turn. He signaled for silence. and we crept forward until the passage opened into a wide chamber lined with pipes and pressure gauges, their brass faces gleaming faintly in the lamplight. At the far end stood a man in a dark overcoat, his back to us, adjusting something on a console that looked far too complex for any ordinary engineer. Holmes's voice, low but cutting, broke the quiet. "That will do, sir. I would advise you not to move another inch." The man turned slowly, and the light fell upon his face. I recognized him at once, the clerk who had met us at the entrance, his manner anxious and deferential. But the expression he wore now was one of cold amusement. "Mr. Holmes," he said softly, "I wondered how long it would take you to find the real power source." Holmes stepped closer, his gaze unblinking. "You are not a clerk," he said. "You are Meriton's successor, the mind behind this new device, the so-called friend of illumination." The man inclined his head, almost in mock courtesy. "Successor, perhaps, but Meriton was a dreamer. I am a realist. He saw light as progress. I see it as control. A city that depends on light can be ruled by those who command the darkness." He gestured toward the complex array before him. "This is no mere sabotage, Holmes. It is demonstration. One brief pulse of energy through these wires, and every lamp in London will flare and die. The city will wake in blindness, and then it will obey." Holmes's voice remained calm, though I saw the tension gather in the lines of his face. "And you intend to profit from that chaos?" "Profit?" The man smiled thinly. "Not in coin, in obedience. The ministry already bows to men they cannot name. I am one of those men." He reached toward a lever on the panel, but Holmes was already moving. In 2 long strides he closed the distance, seizing the man's wrist before it could fall. The struggle was brief, but fierce. The fellow fought like a man possessed, his other hand clawing at Holmes's sleeve. I moved forward. "But," Holmes shouted, "Watson, no! The device touched nothing!" A burst of sparks flew from the console as the man's elbow struck a switch. The lights in the chamber flickered violently. The pipes began to hum with rising pressure. Holmes twisted the man's arm with a sudden motion that forced him to his knees. "Enough!" he barked. "You'll blow half the city sky high." The man laughed, a wild, broken sound. "That is precisely the point." Holmes drove him backward against the stone floor, pinning him with his knee. "Watson, cut the main valve." "The large one marked in red," he ordered. I rushed to the wall and found the handle, but the metal was scalding hot. I wrapped my coat around my hand and wrenched with all my strength. For an instant it resisted, then gave way with a shriek of strained metal. The vibration ceased. The lights steadied. The room fell silent, except for the harsh breathing of the 3 of us. Holmes rose slowly, keeping his revolver trained on the man, whose arrogance had drained away, leaving only exhaustion. "Your game is over," Holmes said quietly. "London will see the dawn, and you will see the inside of Newgate." The man looked up at him with a strange smile. "Do you truly think this city can remain safe by your hand alone? You can snuff one flame, Holmes, but the darkness always returns." Holmes regarded him for a long moment. "Perhaps," he said at last, "but while I stand, it will not find the city unguarded." He turned to me. "Fetch Lestrade and 2 constables from above. Tell them to secure this man and seal off the chamber. The system must be dismantled piece by piece." When I returned with Lestrade, Holmes had already stripped the control unit apart and was examining its inner workings with a grim satisfaction. "You see, Lestrade," he explained, "our friend here built upon Meriton's stolen design. He replaced the pressure regulator with an electrical core capable of amplifying current through the city's network. A single pulse, and the main lines would ignite. He called it illumination, but it was annihilation." Lestrade shook his head. "A madman. There's no end to them, is there, Holmes?" "Not madness, Inspector," Holmes replied. "Vision without conscience often more dangerous than lunacy." The prisoner was hauled away, silent now but still wearing that faint, unfathomable smile. Holmes watched until the door closed behind him, then turned to me with a sigh that seemed to release the tension of the past weeks. "It is finished, Watson, truly finished this time." We emerged from the ministry just as the sun lifted over the Thames. The fog had thinned, and the water shone like polished glass beneath the pale light. London's chimneys trailed thin ribbons of smoke into the new morning sky. Holmes paused on the steps, his eyes reflecting the soft gleam of dawn. "Strange, is it not?" he murmured. "The city wakes, its heart still beating, its lamps still burning, yet it knows nothing of how close it came to losing all. That is the burden of those who guard it to save what others will never know was in peril." I watched him as the wind stirred his coat, the familiar figure outlined against the brightening day. "And yet, Holmes," I said quietly, "you look as though victory brings you no peace." He smiled faintly. "Peace, my dear Watson, is for those who can rest. My mind is like London itself, ever restless, ever hungry for the next flicker of mystery. When the light burns too steadily, I fear it will blind me. But when it dims, then I am alive again." We walked together through the waking streets, the shopkeepers raising their shutters, the milk carts rattling past. Life resumed its rhythm as though nothing had changed. Yet as we reached Baker Street once more, Holmes paused at the threshold, his gaze lingering on the faint curl of smoke from our chimney. "Do you hear it, Watson?" he said softly. "Hear what?" "The hum beneath the city. Machinery, gas, wires, engines, all the inventions of men who believe they command the light. And yet, somewhere below, the darkness still waits for its hour. It always does." He turned, a glimmer of that familiar mischief returning to his eyes. "But until that hour comes, let us content ourselves with simpler mysteries, perhaps, that curious case of the vanishing pawnbroker from Southwark." I laughed, the weight lifting at last. "Only if you allow me one full night's rest before it begins." "Agreed," Holmes said with a rare warmth. "Even the flame must rest between burnings." And so we stepped inside, the door closing behind us as the golden light of morning spilled across the streets of London, bright, alive, and, for the moment, safe beneath the vigilant eye of Sherlock Holmes.